6 months into the war, and humanity had lost 11 colonies, over 2 million people had died, and 30 million more had become refugees fleeing toward the safety of Earth's inner systems. But humanity had not broken. Commander Quan stood in the war room of Earth's military headquarters, studying the holographic map that showed the current state of the conflict. Red markers indicated Valorian forces, and they outnumbered the blue human markers by 20 to 1. The Dominion High Council has dispatched their elite fleet, Admiral San reported. 2,000 ships under the command of Admiral Vorath. Quan knew that name Vorath was a legend among the Valorians, a military commander who had never lost a campaign in 500 years of service. He had crushed rebellions across 100 worlds and earned a reputation for absolute ruthlessness. How long until they arrive? Quan asked. 12 days. 12 days to prepare for the final assault. Quan turned to face his senior officers, and he saw the fear in their eyes. He understood that fear, because he felt it too. But fear was just another enemy to overcome. "I have a plan," he said. "It is desperate and dangerous and will probably get most of us killed." "We are listening," Captain Park replied from her position at the tactical console. Quan pointed to a location on the map, deep within Valorian territory. "This is Nexus Prime, and it is the main supply depot for all Dominion military operations in this sector. It is also one of the most heavily defended installations in their empire," Admiral San pointed out, "which is exactly why they will not expect us to attack it." The room fell silent as the officers considered the implications. "While Vorath's fleet advances on Earth, we take a strike force to Nexus Prime and destroy their supplies," Quan continued. "Without fuel and ammunition, their fleet becomes a collection of very expensive targets." "And Earth?" Park asked. "Who defends our homeworld while we are gone?" Quan met her eyes. "You do, Captain." Park nodded slowly, understanding what he was asking of her. She would command a skeleton defense force against the most powerful fleet the Dominion had ever assembled. Her job was not to win her. Job was to survive long enough for the strike force to return. "I will need everything we can spare," she said. "You will have it. And I am only taking volunteers on the strike mission, because no one should be ordered to die." "Permission to volunteer, Commander?" It was Lieutenant Bei Minho, and behind him stood a dozen other officers, all raising their hands. Within the hour, Quan had more volunteers than he could take. He selected 50 ships and their crews, leaving the rest to defend Earth under Park's command. The day before the strike force departed, Quan received a message from the Keth Ari Elder. "We have prepared what you asked for," they said. "Our agents throughout Dominion space are ready to act." What will they do? Small things at first, like delayed shipments and accidental damage to equipment and workers who forget how to perform their duties. But small things become large when enough hands participate. Quan felt the weight of what was happening for the first time in 4 centuries. The conquered peoples of the Dominion were resisting. It was not open rebellion, not yet, but it was a crack in the foundation of Valorian power. "Thank you," he said. "Do not thank us yet, human, because we have not won anything. And many of our people will die in the days ahead. So will many of mine." The elder was silent for a moment. "Perhaps that is what makes us worthy of freedom, the willingness to pay the price it demands." The strike force departed the next morning, jumping through hidden routes that Kethari intelligence had provided for 3 days. They traveled through enemy territory without detection on the 4th day. They reached Nexus Prime. The depot was massive, a sprawling complex of fuel storage tanks and ammunition warehouses spread across 3 interconnected space stations. Thousands of ships pass through here every month, and destroying it would cripple Valorian logistics for years. It was also defended by 200 warships and countless automated weapon platforms. "All ships." "This is Commander Quan," he broadcast to his fleet. "We all know what we came here to do. So let us show the galaxy what humans are made of. The battle began with a coordinated assault on the outer defense perimeter. Human ships used the gravity spike weapons that Dr. Yoon had created, now mass-produced in secret factories across Earth's remaining territories. Each spike destroyed enemy vessels with terrifying efficiency. But the humans had limited supplies and needed to use them carefully. Valorian defenders scrambled to respond to the unexpected attack, and their confusion was amplified by something they could not understand. Half of their automated systems were malfunctioning weapon platforms, fired at empty space while human ships passed. Untouched shield generators flickered. On and off communication channels filled with static at crucial moments. The Cathari sabotage was working. Quan pushed deeper into the complex, his flagship leading the charge toward the central fuel depot. If he could destroy that, the explosion would take out most of the station complex with it. Commander, we have incoming reinforcements, his tactical officer reported. 50 ships dropping out of FTL. Quan checked the identification codes and allowed himself a moment of surprise. The ships were not Valorian. They were Cathari ancient warships, hidden for 400 years and maintained in secret by generations of engineers who dreamed of freedom, now emerged to fight alongside humanity. Elder, Quan transmitted. I thought you said you would only watch. We watched, the Elder replied, their voice carrying through the communication channel. And we saw something worth believing in. Together, the human and Cathari ships broke through the final defensive line. Quan's flagship reached the central fuel depot and began launching everything it had. All ships, clear the blast zone, he ordered. The depot exploded in a blinding flash that consumed the station and dozens of ships on both sides. When the light faded, Nexus Prime was nothing but expanding debris back at Earth. Captain Park received news of the strike force's success while staring at a sensor display that showed Admiral Varath's fleet dropping out of FTL, 2,000 ships against her 43. Captain, we cannot win this, her first officer said quietly. We do not need to win, Park replied. We need to survive long enough for Quan to return. Var's flagship broadcast a surrender demand across all frequencies. Humans, your position is hopeless, and your commander has abandoned you on a fool's errand. So surrender now, and some of you may live to serve the Dominion, Park responded personally. Admiral, I have a counteroffer, and here it is. Come and take our world if you can. The battle for Earth began. Park used every trick she had learned in 6 months of desperate fighting. She positioned her ships to use Earth's moon as cover. She deployed mines and remote weapons, platforms and layers. She even used civilian cargo ships filled with explosives as improvised missiles for 6 hours. She held the line against impossible odds. Ship after ship fell, but the humans refused to retreat. Then, on the 7th hour, new contacts appeared on the sensors. The strike force had returned, battered and bloody, but still fighting, and they were not alone. The Cathari ships that had joined them at Nexus Prime came as well, and behind them came more vessels from species no human had ever met. The Elder's message had spread. Other conquered peoples had seen humans fight, had seen them bleed, had seen them refuse to surrender, and they had decided to remember their own fire. Varth watched his tactical display as his numerical advantage began to shrink. His supply lines were destroyed. His allies were turning against him, and somewhere in the chaos of battle, a small human ship positioned itself to shield a damaged Cathari medical vessel from Valorian fire. The human captain's final transmission was recorded and would become legendary. This is what we fight for, she said. Each other. Captain Park Jizu died protecting aliens her species had met only days before. Her sacrifice became a symbol that spread across the galaxy. Admiral Varth facing a coalition that grew stronger with every hour. Received new orders from the Dominion High Council. Withdraw, regroup, negotiate, for the first time in Valorian history. An invasion fleet retreated from a species that should have been conquered in days. The war was not over, but the tide had turned, and humanity was no longer fighting alone. Admiral Vorath stood on the bridge of his damaged flagship and watched Earth grow larger in the viewscreen. His fleet had retreated to the edge of the system to regroup. But the High Council had given him new orders: return and finish what he started, or face the consequences of failure for the first time in 500 years of service. Vorath questioned whether victory was possible. Admiral, his aide reported. We are detecting new contacts entering the system. Human reinforcements? No, Admiral, and the identification codes are unknown. Vorath studied the sensor data with growing unease. 4 new species had entered the battle. Ships he did not recognize from any Dominion records. They were vessels that belonged to peoples conquered so long ago that they had been forgotten by everyone except themselves. The Cathari had been only the beginning. How many ships? Current count is 300 and climbing. Admiral, 300 ships from species that should have been broken centuries ago, and behind them, the battered human fleet was reforming. Its ranks swelled by the strike force returning from Nexus Prime. Vorath calculated the odds and found them turning against him, but he was a Valorian commander, and Valorians did not retreat twice. All ships advance on the human homeworld, and we will crush this rebellion before it spreads further. The final battle for Earth began at dawn over the Pacific Ocean. Commander Quan led the combined fleet from the bridge of his flagship, flanked by Cathari vessels and ships from 4 other species, whose names humanity was only beginning to learn. All ships. This is Commander Quan, he broadcast. Today we fight not just for Earth, but for every world that has suffered under Dominion chains. So let us show them what free peoples can accomplish together. The 2 fleets collided in a storm of fire and light gravity. Spike weapons tore through Valorian capital ships, while the enemy's superior firepower hammered the coalition's defensive lines. Ships died on both sides, filling the space around Earth with debris and bodies. But the coalition held the Rithani, a species conquered 800 years ago, fought with a fury that surprised even their allies. Their ships were old and outdated, but their pilots flew with the skill of people who had practiced in secret for generations. The Morvith brought weapons the Dominion had banned centuries ago, technologies they had hidden in the depths of gas giants where no Valorian would look. Even the Dasani, cousins of the Valorians themselves, sent 3 ships to fight against their own blood. Declaring that empire was not worth the cost of honor, Commander Quan found himself fighting beside people he could not have imagined. Meeting 6 months ago, and he understood that this was what the Dominion truly feared: not human weapons or human ships, but human stubbornness, human refusal to accept defeat, human willingness to reach out to anyone who shared their dream of freedom. That was the infection spreading through their empire. That was what they could not stop. Admiral Vorath pushed deeper into the coalition lines, his flagship leading the charge toward Earth itself. If he could reach the planet and begin bombardment, perhaps the coalition would break. Perhaps they would sacrifice each other to save themselves. That was how conquered peoples behaved. That was what the Dominion had always counted on. But when his flagship broke through the final defensive line, he found something unexpected waiting for him: a single human ship, damaged and barely functional, positioned directly in his path. It was the ship that had led the strike on Nexus Prime Commander Quan's vessel. Human, Vorath broadcast. You cannot stop me with 1 ship, so move aside and I will grant you a quick death. Quan's response came through clearly despite the static of battle. Admiral, I am not here to stop you, and I am here to offer you a choice. A choice? The Dominion is dying, not today and maybe not tomorrow. But the fire we started will spread until it consumes everything your empire has built. Varth laughed. But the sound was hollow. You overestimate your importance, human. Perhaps. But answer me this. How many rebellions are happening across Dominion space right now? Vorath did not answer because he knew the truth reports had been coming in for days. 3 sectors had declared independence. 12 subject species had begun open resistance. The Cathari uprising had spread to every world where their people lived. Your empire is too large to hold together. Once people stop believing, it cannot be challenged. Quan continued, you can destroy Earth today. Maybe kill every human in the galaxy, but you cannot kill the idea we represent. And what idea is that? That no one has to be a slave, and no empire lasts forever. And even the smallest people can change the course of history if they refuse to give up. Vorath stared at the human ship on his screen. He had conquered 100 worlds. He had broken species that were older than humanity's entire civilization, but he had never faced an enemy like this, an enemy who treated defeat as just another obstacle. An enemy who would rather die than kneel. An enemy who somehow made other species want to fight alongside them. What are your terms? He finally asked, withdraw your fleet and negotiate. And the Dominion can survive as one power among many, or stay and fight. And watch your empire crumble one system at a time. The battle continued to rage around them as Vorath considered his options. His fleet was winning the tactical engagement, but his empire was losing the war every hour that passed. More systems slipped away. More species remembered their pride. More Valorians questioned whether the cost was worth the price. The High Council will never accept peace with lesser species, he said. Then the High Council will fall too. And maybe something better will rise in its place? Vorath looked at the tactical display one more time. He saw the coalition ships fighting with desperate courage. He saw his own forces, still powerful but bleeding from 1,000 wounds. He saw the future, and he knew which way the tide was flowing. All ships, he commanded, his voice heavy with an emotion he could not name. Withdraw from the system. Admiral? His aide asked in disbelief. We are leaving because this war is over. And we lost it the moment we underestimated what these humans could become. The Valorian fleet retreated from Earth for the last time 1 year later. Representatives from 12 species gathered in a great hall on Earth's surface. Diplomat Cho Mai-Rei stood at the podium, looking out at faces from worlds she had only dreamed of visiting. Cathari and Rethani and Morvith and Dasani and 8 others, all united by a war that should have destroyed them. Commander Quan sat in the front row, his hair now completely gray after a year of impossible stress. Beside him was an empty chair with a holographic image of Captain Park Jisoo above it. She would never be forgotten. Today we form the Free Worlds Alliance, Cho Mai-Rei announced. Not an empire and not a dominion, but a partnership of equals who choose to stand together. Applause filled the hall, a sound that would have been impossible a year ago. The Valorians called us small, she continued. They called us weak and primitive and doomed to fail, and they forgot one thing. She paused, looking at each delegation in turn. They forgot that small sparks start the greatest fires. Outside the hall, construction crews were building a memorial wall. When it was finished, it would list the names of everyone who had died fighting for freedom, human names and Cathari names and names from a dozen other species, all carved into stone that would last for centuries. The inscription at the top was simple. They stood when standing seemed impossible, and across the galaxy, the fire that humanity had started continued to spread. Some fires, once lit, can never be extinguished. This was one of them. The fight for survival had ended. The era of freedom had begun. The Valorian invasion began on the morning of Earth's spring equinox, and it came from 4 directions at once. 800 warships divided into 4 fleets, each one targeting a different human system. Overseer Thiessen commanded the assault personally, expecting to crush this upstart species within a week. He had conquered 12 worlds before humanity even discovered fire. This would be no different. Captain Park Jisoo received the alert while running combat drills near the Arcturus Gateway, the narrow passage of stable space that connected Earth's territory to the wider galaxy. Multiple contacts emerging from FTL, her tactical officer reported. Count as 187 vessels. Park gripped the arms of her command chair. How long until they reached the gateway? 4 hours at their current speed. She had 17 ships under her command, 17 against nearly 200. The mathematics of survival did not favor her today. Signal all vessels, she ordered. We hold this position until Earth says otherwise. Her communication officer looked at her with wide eyes. Captain, they will destroy us. Probably, Park agreed. But every minute we hold them here is another minute for civilians to evacuate and another minute for reinforcements to arrive. So we fight. The battle for Arcturus Gateway began at 1400 hours Earth Standard Time. Park had positioned her ships in a defensive formation that used the natural gravitational anomalies of the gateway to create choke points. The Valorians had to come through in smaller groups or risk losing ships to the unstable space around them. It was not much of an advantage, but she would take whatever she could get. The first wave hit her defensive line like a hammer striking glass. 2 human ships exploded in the opening exchange, their shields overwhelmed by concentrated fire from 6 Valorian cruisers. But as the enemy vessels pushed forward, Park sprung her first trap. Detonate the cargo pods, she ordered, hidden among the debris of an old mining station. Human engineers had placed cargo containers filled with explosive compounds and metal fragments. The detonation tore through the advancing Valorian ships, destroying one outright and crippling 3 others. They are regrouping, Minho reported from his station. Good, because that means they are being careful now. And careful takes time. The Valorians changed tactics. Instead of rushing through the gateway, they began a systematic bombardment from range, trying to wear down human shields before closing in. Park ordered her ships to keep moving, using the gravitational eddies to make targeting difficult. Hours passed, more human ships fell. But the Valorians paid for every victory in blood. Park watched the damaged human cruiser, its engines failing and its weapons depleted, turn directly toward a Valorian dreadnought. What is Captain Moon doing? Minho asked. Park knew exactly what he was doing. He is buying us time. The cruiser accelerated on its remaining power and slammed into the dreadnought. At full speed, the explosion consumed both vessels, leaving nothing but expanding clouds of debris. Overseer Thiessen watched the tactical display with growing frustration. He had expected these humans to break and run after the first exchange. Instead, they were fighting like cornered animals, using every trick and sacrifice to delay his advance. Order the fleet to press forward, he commanded. No more caution, Overseer, his aide ventured. Our losses are higher than projected. They are still acceptable. Now execute my orders. The Valorian fleet surged forward, finally overwhelming Park's defensive line through sheer numbers. But the humans had bought 6 hours instead of the expected 30 minutes on Earth. Those 6 hours meant the difference between chaos and organized. Defense Commander Quan received word of the breakthrough and immediately ordered the second phase of his plan. Contact Diplomat Cho, he said. Tell her it is time. Cho Mai-Rei had spent the past 3 months reaching out to every subjugated species she could find. Most were too afraid to respond, but some had sent encrypted messages of support. hidden in routine communications that Valorian monitors would never notice. Now she broadcast a message across all known frequencies, encoded in a way that only non-Valorian species would understand. "The humans are fighting," she said. "We are not asking you to join our war, but we are asking you to watch. And if you see something worth believing in, remember that empires are not eternal across Valorian space." Billions of conquered peoples heard her words. Most did nothing, but some began to whisper, and whispers had a way of spreading back at Arcturus. Park's surviving ships fell back toward the inner system, still fighting, still bleeding the enemy for every kilometer of space. She had lost 9 ships now, with 3 more badly damaged, but she had also destroyed 17 Valorian vessels and damaged dozens more. The Dominion had never lost so many ships to a single engagement against any species. Thiessen could not understand it. Why do they not surrender? He demanded. Their situation is hopeless. They appear to believe they can still win. Overseer, impossible. And they must know it is impossible. His aide hesitated before speaking. Perhaps they are not fighting to win. Overseer, perhaps they are fighting for something else. Thiessen did not understand. And that lack of understanding would cost him dearly in the days to come. As the battle continued, Dr. Yoon Seoha arrived at the front lines aboard a fast transport ship. She carried with her 3 prototype gravity spike weapons, completed 2 weeks ahead of schedule through sleepless nights and desperate innovation. "I need a ship that can get close to their command vessel," she told Park through the communication channel. "That is suicide." "I know." Park closed her eyes for a moment. Then she gave the order for a volunteer crew to escort Yoon's transport toward the Valorian flagship. The small formation of ships broke through the enemy line through a combination of speed, luck, and the sacrifice of 2 escort vessels. Yoon armed the gravity spikes as they closed range, firing. She announced 3 projectiles launched toward the Valorian flagship and 2 other capital ships nearby. The Valorians detected the incoming weapons and fired point defense systems. 1 spike was destroyed. The other 2 found their targets. The effect was immediate and terrifying. The 2 Valorian capital ships crumpled like paper being crushed in a fist emergency. Signals cut off mid-transmission. Over 4,000 Valorian crew members died in seconds. Thiessen watched his tactical display in disbelief. What was that weapon? No one could answer him. The humans had done something impossible. And suddenly, the mathematics of this war looked very different. Park received the news of Yoon's success and allowed herself a moment of grim satisfaction. "Doctor, get back to Earth, because we need more of those weapons." "I am afraid that is not possible." "Captain." Park looked at the sensor readings and felt her heart sink. Yoon's transport had been crippled by debris from the destroyed ships. Life support was failing, and she had no way to escape. "I can activate 1 more spike from here," Yoon said calmly. "If you can draw their ships toward my position." "Yoon, do not do this." "Tell them it worked, Captain." "And tell them to build more." Park ordered her remaining ships to feint toward Yoon's position, drawing Valorian vessels in pursuit. 6 enemy cruisers converged on what they thought was a helpless target. Yoon activated the final gravity spike at close range, catching all 6 ships in its field. The weapon also caught her own transport. Dr. Yoon Seoha died alongside the enemies of her species, and her sacrifice destroyed more Valorian ships in 1 moment than any weapon humanity had ever created. Thiessen withdrew his fleet to regroup, something he had never done in 3 centuries of conquest across Valorian space. Reports of the battle spread through underground channels. The Cathari Elder received news of the gravity weapons and immediately contacted Commander Kwan. "Your people fight with fire we thought was lost from the galaxy," they said. We have decided, and the Cathari will remember how to burn. The war was far from over, but something had shifted in the balance of power. And Overseer Thyssen was beginning to realize that humanity was not prey. They were something far more dangerous. They were believers in their own survival. And belief was the one weapon no empire could ever truly defeat. Captain Park Jisoo stood at the bridge of the horizon's edge and watched the stars stretch into lines as her ship dropped out of faster-than-light travel for the first time in 3 weeks. The year was 2247, and humanity had only discovered FTL technology 18 months ago. Every jump still felt like a miracle to her captain. "We have contacts on the scanner," Lieutenant Bae Minho said from his station, his voice carrying an edge of excitement mixed with concern. Park turned to face him and raised an eyebrow. "How many contacts?" 17 ships, Captain. And they are big." The main view screen flickered and displayed the formation ahead of them. Park felt her breath catch in her throat as she saw the vessels. Each one was massive, easily 10 times the size of the horizon's edge. Their hulls gleamed with a dark purple metal she had never seen before, and strange symbols covered their surfaces like ancient warnings. "Are they responding to our presence?" she asked. "They are changing course," Minho replied. "They are heading directly toward us." Park had trained her entire life for moments like this. She had imagined first contact with alien species 1,000 times in her dreams. It had always been peaceful, a meeting of curious minds reaching across the void. But the way those ships moved told her something different. They moved like predators. "Open all communication channels," she ordered. "Broadcast our peaceful intentions in every language and format we have." The communication officer, Ensign Cho Yuna, worked frantically at her console, broadcasting now. "Captain," for 3 long minutes. Nothing happened. Then the view screen changed to show a face that was definitely not human. The creature had pale gray skin, stretched tight over angular bones. Its eyes were solid black, like pools of ink, and they held no warmth at all when it spoke. The universal translator built into the ship system struggled for a moment before catching up. "You are in Valorian space," the alien said. "You will identify yourselves and explain your presence immediately." Park stepped forward and lifted her chin. "I am Captain Park Jisoo of the Earth vessel Horizon's Edge, and we are explorers seeking peaceful contact with other civilizations." The Valorian made a sound that might have been laughter, but it sounded more like stones grinding together. "Earth," it repeated. "We have no record of this world. And that means you are newcomers to the stars." "We achieved faster-than-light travel recently," Park admitted. "We mean no offense by entering your territory. And we had no way of knowing it belonged to anyone." "Ignorance is not a defense," the Valorian replied. "You have settled 3 systems in what we designate as our expansion corridor, and this is a violation of Dominion sovereignty." Park felt ice form in her stomach. 3 systems. That meant the colonies on Kepler's Hope, New Geneva, and Arcturus Station. Nearly 4 million human beings lived in those places now. "We were not aware of any claims to those systems," she said carefully. "Perhaps we can discuss this and reach an understanding." The Valorian leaned closer to whatever device was recording its image. "There is nothing to discuss. Human and the Valorian Dominion does not negotiate with lesser species." The screen went dark. 2 hours later, Park found herself aboard the largest Valorian vessel, standing in a chamber that seemed designed to make visitors feel small. Towering pillars rose toward a ceiling lost in shadow, and the Valorian who had spoken to her sat on an elevated platform that forced her to look up. His name was Overseer Thyssen, and he commanded this patrol fleet. "Your species has 2 options," Thyssen said, his black eyes fixed on her with cold interest. "You may submit to the Dominion as a vassal species, which means you will serve us in whatever capacity we require. Or you may resist, and we will take your worlds by force. And if we submit? Park asked, keeping her voice steady despite the fear churning inside her. You will be assigned duties appropriate to your abilities. And your population growth will be regulated to prevent you from becoming a burden. And your technology will be monitored to ensure you never threaten the natural order. Park understood what he was really saying. Slavery. He was offering humanity slavery with extra steps. I will need to bring this offer to my government, she said. Thyssen waved one long-fingered hand dismissively. You have 30 standard cycles. And then we will come for our answer. Park returned to the horizon's edge and immediately set course for Earth. At maximum speed, the journey took 12 days. And she spent every moment preparing her report when she finally stood before the United Planetary Council in Geneva. She held nothing back. They see us as insects, she told the assembled leaders. They do not want peace or cooperation. And they want obedience. Commander Quan Tian, the military advisor to the council, stood from his seat. He was a tall man with gray streaking his black hair and eyes that had seen too many battles. What are their military capabilities? He asked. Their patrol fleet alone outguns everything we have combined, Park admitted. And from what Thyssen said, this patrol fleet is a tiny fraction of their total forces. Murmurs of fear rippled through the chamber. Diplomat Chomire raised her hand for silence. She was young for her position, barely 40, but her reputation for finding solutions to impossible problems had earned her a seat at this table. Perhaps we can find allies, she suggested. Other species who might stand with us. The Dominion controls over 3,000 star systems, Park replied. Any species that might help us is probably already under their control. The debate continued for hours. Some argued for submission, saying that survival under Valorian rule was better than extinction. Others demanded resistance, declaring that humanity would rather die free than live as slaves. Commander Quan listened to both sides and then asked for permission to speak again. I have spent my career studying military history, he said, and I have learned one lesson above all others, which is that the side that refuses to quit is often the side that wins. We cannot win against those odds. One council member protested. We do not need to win, Quan replied. We need to make victory cost them more than they are willing to pay. And empires are not defeated by strength alone, because they are defeated when the price of holding on becomes greater than the price of letting go. Before the council could respond, an intelligence officer rushed into the chamber with urgent news. We intercepted Valorian communications, she announced. They never intended to honor any agreement. And orders were already sent to prepare invasion forces before Captain Park even returned to Earth. Silence fell over the room. The Valorians had offered a choice that was never really a choice at all. Diplomat Chomire stood slowly, her face pale but determined. Then we have our answer, she said. We cannot trust them. And submission only delays our destruction. The vote was called. Every single member of the council raised their hand in favor of resistance. Commander Quan nodded grimly and turned to Captain Park. Return to your ship, Captain, because we have work to do. As Park walked out of the chamber, she felt the weight of what had just happened settle onto her shoulders. Humanity had just declared war on an unlying empire that spanned thousands of stars. They had 47 warships. The Dominion had 12,000, but they had something else too. Something the Valorians had never encountered before. They had 4 billion people who would rather die fighting than live on their knees. The fight for survival had begun. 3 months had passed since humanity chose to fight, and the orbital shipyards above Earth burned bright with activity every hour of every day. Commander Quan Tian stood at the observation deck of Station Prime and watched as workers swarmed over the skeletal frames of new Warships. They were building as fast as they could. But he knew it would never be fast enough. We have completed 12 new vessels this month, Admiral Son Yoonji reported, standing beside him with a datapad in her hands. That brings our total fleet to 59 combat-ready ships, and the Dominion has 12,000. Quan said quietly, "Yes, Commander." He turned away from the window and walked toward the lift that would take him to the research levels. "Show me what Dr. Yoon has been working on." They descended deep into the station, past security checkpoints and reinforced doors, until they reached a laboratory filled with equipment that hummed with barely contained energy. Dr. Yoon Seoa looked up from her work as they entered. She was small and thin, with dark circles under her eyes that spoke of too many sleepless nights. But her gaze held a fire that Quan had learned to recognize. It was the look of someone who had found something important. "Commander," she said, "I was about to call you. What do you have for me, Doctor?" Yoon led them to a holographic display that showed a complex web of equations and diagrams. "The Valorians have superior technology in almost every way," she explained. "Their shields are stronger, their weapons more powerful, and their ships faster. But I found something they overlooked." She manipulated the display, and it changed to show a representation of gravitational waves. "Humans have studied gravity in ways most species consider pointless." She continued, "We became obsessed with understanding how mass bends space, and the Valorians dismissed this research as primitive curiosity with no practical application. But you found an application." Quan guessed. Yoon smiled for the first time in weeks. "I found a weapon, Commander, and I call it the gravity spike." She showed them simulations of the device in action. A small projectile, launched from a human ship, would reach a target vessel and activate. The result was devastating. The target ship collapsed in on itself as artificial gravity crushed it from every direction at once. "This will work against their shields?" Admiral Son asked. "Their shields are designed to stop energy weapons and kinetic impacts," Yoon replied. "They have no defense against localized gravity manipulation, because they never imagined anyone would try it." Quan felt something he had not allowed himself to feel since this crisis began. Hope. "How soon can you have working prototypes?" 2 months for testing and another month for production." "You have 6 weeks, Quan said. "Make it work." He left the laboratory and headed for the communication center. There was another part of his plan that needed attention, and it was far more dangerous than building weapons. The Cathari were a species the Dominion had conquered 400 years ago. They now served as laborers and technicians throughout Valorian space, considered too weak and passive to pose any threat. But Quan had read the historical records that survived from before the conquest. The Cathari had fought for 3 decades before they fell. A species that could resist for 30 years was not weak, it was patient. He had sent covert messages through back channels, using frequencies the Dominion did not monitor. And 3 weeks ago, he received a response. Now he was traveling to a remote asteroid in neutral space to meet with someone who called themselves only the Elder. His shuttle was small and unarmed, and he went alone as requested. The meeting place was a cavern carved into the asteroid's interior, lit by bioluminescent fungi that cast everything in pale blue light. The Cathari who waited for him was old, with leathery skin the color of rust and 4 eyes that studied Quan with obvious suspicion. "You are the human commander," the Elder said, their voice like wind through dry leaves. "I am. Why should we believe you are different from the Valorians?" Quan had expected this question. He had prepared speeches and arguments and promises, but standing here, facing someone whose people had suffered for centuries, all of that felt hollow. "I cannot prove anything with words," he admitted. "Actions are the only proof that matters." "Then what do you offer us?" the Elder asked. "Freedom, perhaps. given to us by human hands the way it was taken by Valorian ones. Quan shook his head. No, because freedom given is not freedom at all, and it can't be taken back just as easily. The elder's four eyes narrowed. Then what? I offer you the chance to earn your freedom alongside us, Quan said. Not as our servants or our subjects, but as our partners in a fight we might not survive. You expect us to die for your war? I expect nothing, Quan replied. I only ask if you remember what it meant to fight for yourselves. And if that fire still burns somewhere inside your people. The elder was silent for a long moment, finally. They spoke, 400 years we have waited, and 400 years we have pretended to be broken while we remembered. And you are asking us to risk everything on a species that did not exist when our chains were forged. Yes. Another silence. The young ones are restless, the elder finally said. They read the old stories and dream of rebellion. And the old ones remember what we lost and weep in the darkness where Valorians cannot see. They moved closer to Quan, and he saw something in those ancient eyes that made his heart pound. Show us that humans have not forgotten how to fight. And perhaps we will remember to. Before Quan could respond, his communicator buzzed with an urgent message from Admiral San. Commander, the Valorians have attacked Kepler's Hope. Quan's blood turned cold. Casualties? Unknown, but they demanded surrender and the colony refused. And they are fighting back. I must go, Quan told the elder. Then go, human. And we will be watching. Quan ran to his shuttle and pushed the engines to their limit. By the time he reached command range, the battle was nearly over. The colony had no warships, only converted cargo vessels and mining craft against a Valorian scout fleet. They should have been destroyed in minutes instead. The colonists had fought for 6 hours. They used mining lasers as weapons. They rammed their ships into Valorian vessels. They detonated fuel depots and created traps that cost the enemy 3 ships before the end. When the Valorians finally achieved control, they found empty shelters. The civilians had evacuated during the battle, escaping through tunnels to hidden ships that carried them to safety. Overseer Thyssen, watching the reports from his flagship, threw a datapad across his command chamber in fury. How did they escape? He demanded. The colonists delayed us long enough for evacuation. His aide replied nervously. This should have been a simple subjugation. They did not behave like a conquered people. Overseer Thyssen stared at the tactical display showing his losses. 3 ships destroyed. 172 Valorian soldiers dead. Against a colony with no military forces at all. Bring me intelligence on their home system, he ordered. I want to know everything about Earth, across the void. Commander Quan received a new message through the covert channel. It was from the elder. We remember what it meant to fight. And now show us that humans have not forgotten either. The alliance was not yet formed, but something had changed for the first time in 4 centuries. The conquered peoples of the Dominion were watching the stars with hope in their eyes, and the Valorians had no idea what they had awakened.